This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And to want to give a special thank you to Juan San Miguel, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 586 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the last 10 stories in the new book Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits. We discussed the first 9 stories back in episode 583, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And this will include spoilers for everything in the book, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined today by my good friend Tom Gerencer, making his 33rd appearance on the show. He's the author of the business book Think Like Google, the short story collection Intergalactic Refrigerator Repairmen Seldom Carry Cash, and the popular science book How It's Made, which he wrote for the Discovery Channel. His middle grade novel The Magic Ski Mountain is out now. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here.
Okay, so just one bit of housekeeping before we get started. So last time, Tom and I talked about whether or not to review the Harlan Ellison stories A Boy and His Dog and Croatoan, which are two of my all-time favorite Harlan Ellison stories, and they're not included in this book. And so what we decided to do is after we recorded that, I discovered that there's another book called The Top of the Volcano, The Award-Winning Stories of Harlan Ellison. And it includes 11 more stories, including A Boy and His Dog and Croatoan, 11 stories that aren't in this book. So our current plan is to do a part 3 of Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits, where we talk about those 11 stories. So if you want our thoughts on A Boy and His Dog and Croatoan, keep an eye out for part 3. But for part 2, we'll just be talking about the second half of Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits. So we'll be picking up with the story On the Downhill Side, 1972. Now, so in this story, it's set in New Orleans, and the main character is a ghost, and he has a unicorn sidekick who sort of accompanies him through the afterlife. And he has been, he's been punished by the god of love. He had killed himself in his life and was punished by the god of love for always loving too much. And somehow his soul was split into a male half, which is him, and a female half, which is this woman, Lisette, this other ghost that he's pursuing. And so he loves too much and she doesn't love enough. And somehow, on the night that the story takes place, he has basically this one chance to convince her to reunite with him, or they will both be wandering as ghosts forever. Does that sound right, Tom? Is that basically what this story was about?
It is, but am I correct in thinking that this story, at the end of the story, they both kind of become a unicorn together?
So I think what happens at the end is that the man and woman merge. They sort of merge into one consciousness, and then the unicorn sacrifices itself to save the woman. And so the unicorn dies, and then the two of them are reunited. I think that's. I actually had a lot of trouble remembering. I read this story a couple weeks ago, and it just did not stick in my mind at all. Yeah. And I reread it yesterday or the day before, and it's already fading. So, but that's how I remember the ending anyway.
They do merge, but I thought that when they merged, they became a unicorn. And that's where unicorns come from. I thought that was kind of the kicker at the end of the story, but I may have that completely wrong. But yeah, I pretty much think your synopsis is correct. It's just that I, at the end, was unclear on whether or not I could tell they merged, but I was unclear on whether or not that merging of this person who loved too much and this person who loved too little actually created a unicorn. and that's where unicorns come from. So that's kind of what I walked away with, but I could have that completely wrong.
I don't recall that personally, but I don't know. That's an interesting thought. But what did you like the story, or what did you think of it just overall?
No, I didn't love it. I thought I liked what I thought was the ending, but I wanted a little more from it. Like I was thinking, well, now that they're a unicorn together, it would be cool if their job was to go back and rescue another virgin and another guy who loved too much, or woman who loved too much and man who loved too little, or something, and put them on their back. So it's kind of circular, and then they go back and become food for these demons. But I didn't. The reason I didn't love it, I thought it was very poetic. I think most of his writing is very poetic, and I love that. I think, Zelazny has that same quality of his writing is so lyrical and so full of poetry that it's just almost hypnotic and just really fun to be part of. But I guess the thing I didn't like about it is I didn't understand why not loving enough would make you sort of damned, like make you food for some kind of weird glass demons, which though they weren't really explained really well in my mind either. It was, I think, the best fiction. There's like touchstones that lock into like plug outlets in your mind, these things that are just ready to receive fiction. And I feel like weaker fiction just has these sort of things that are fantasy elements, but you're not really sure why, and they don't really seem to fit anywhere. And these weird kind of glass demons, they were very poetic, but I didn't really get it. They didn't really resonate with anything from my life or from that I could tell. So I think that's why
you took the words right out of my. You took the words right out of my mouth. I completely agree with that. I didn't think the story was very good. Like I said, I had a lot of trouble just remembering it. I mean, like you say, if you were to just look at any randomly selected page of this story, you would think this is probably a really good story because the level of craft with which it's written is very high. It evokes the setting of New Orleans really well. It has this very, this great atmosphere, this great mood to it. But just the actual plot, I didn't think really worked basically at all. And like you say, it's just like almost the entire story in terms of the page count is just sort of setting up this kind of weird, random, magical scenario. And you never really understand like why did, like you say, it doesn't tap into any, at least that I know of, pre-existing mythos or anything. It's just like this world has its own rules and they're all kind of complicated, and it takes a long time to explain, and it doesn't pay off. There's no payoff really for all the time you spent. Like, why does this ghost have a unicorn? That seems kind of random. It just and it's funny you mentioned Zelazny, because this seems like maybe Harlan Ellison trying to channel Zelazny. I don't know. There was just something about the voice that seemed very, very Zelazny-esque to me. And the unicorn and stuff. It just seems, and like we're even sort of confused about what happens at the ends, because I just don't think it really probably held either of our interests super tightly.
One interesting point. Did you ever end up getting the audiobook, or were you still with the print book?
No, I still have the print book. So so I'm counting on you to fill me in on what the intros said in the audiobook. So,
there were intros, right, in the first half for all the stories. Yeah, they stopped doing that in the second. It's funny, like the second half of the book, the stories don't have intros. So, and it's almost like right where we chose to break off last time, that's where they stopped doing the intros.
Okay, well, I'm glad I didn't buy the audio, because I considered buying the audiobook so I could listen to the intro. So I'm glad I didn't do that.
Well, there you go. But what you did miss out on was, I'm being facetious because I don't think you missed anything. There is this really bizarre song called On the Downhill Side that the story ends, and then there's this song that was clearly written by Ellison and commissioned by him with someone else singing it. And I don't know if it was as a favor to him or it was like a fan who did it and sent it to him and he liked it, or it was paid. I don't know. And it's kind of interesting, but it's like this, it's really goes on way too long. Just a super long song about like this unicorn and this woman, and it has her name from the story. And it's like, just goes on and on and on. And it's kind of written in this, it kind of reminded me of the music from, remember when we did a panel on the last unicorn was one of the, it was like animated fantasy from the 70s or something like that.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies.
Yeah, but that had some kind of interesting like folk music in it, and this song on the Downhill Side was done in that vein. It sounded a lot like that, but I just remember I was listening to it going, how much longer is this going to go on? This is so bizarre.
All right, well, I'm glad I missed out on that, but yeah, I mean, like just the you're supposed to be invested in the relationship between this man and woman, and I wasn't at all. They're very weirdly just having their own conversations and not really, reacting to what each other says. And then, the unicorn makes this heroic sacrifice at the end, but I didn't feel like I really cared or got to know the unicorn. I think the unicorn had one line of dialogue, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe there were more, but it was just not, it just didn't really work for me, this story. I don't want to belabor the point. Should we move on, or is there anything else you want to say about On the Downhill Side?
Well, one last thing is that even when you're reading what I would say was bad Harlan Ellison, it's just so lyrical and poetic that it's still kind of okay in a way. So that's all I'll say about it.
Yeah, and I did see online, I saw people who liked this story or, listed it as an Ellison story that they liked or remembered. So, apparently there are some people who like it more than we do, but yeah, it wasn't definitely not one of my favorites. Okay, so let's move on to our next story, Paladin of the Lost Hour. This is one of Ellison's best known stories, at least in this batch of stories. And it was adapted by him into an episode of the Twilight Zone revival from the 80s. And so actually, there's kind of an interesting story where he was working on, I think, the prose version and the screenplay version at the same time, and actually published the prose version, if you're curious. It was in an anthology called Universe 15, edited by Terry Carr. And then after he submitted that, they went to make it into the episode, and the producers wanted him to change the ending. And he fought with them for a week and eventually decided that they were right. And so he actually changed the ending of the screenplay and then went back later and changed the ending of the short story. Wow. But if you go and look at Universe 15, you can read the original ending. And I'm really sad I didn't find this out until, yesterday. So I wasn't able to track that down. But that's kind of an interesting bit about the composition of the story. So the setup is, let's see. So there's an elderly man in a cemetery, talking to the tombstone of his dearly departed wife, and he gets attacked by some young hooligans, and a Vietnam vet steps in and rescues him, and then they become friends and roommates, and it develops that the elderly man has this pocket watch which contains sort of an extra hour of time. If you activate the pocket watch, you can get this extra hour of time. But if the time in the pocket watch runs out, then the universe ends. So it's really important not to let that happen. And so this pocket watch has been passed from guardian to guardian for centuries, and now the elderly man wants to pass it on to his new friend. Is that right? Do you anything we should add about the plot before we?
No, that sums it up pretty well.
Okay, so what did you think of Paladin of the Lost Hour?
I absolutely love this story. It may be my favorite one from the collection. Looking back on all of them, it's such a cool concept about the guy who's responsible for the last hour in the world and keeping it from happening. And I loved how it tied in with the Gregorian calendar and how, there was a whole chunk of time that was just kind of adjusted out of being, and how this comes from that. And it was really cool to put him with this young kid who has this tragedy from the Vietnam War that he can't get over. Because I thought those two characters together were absolutely excellent. The way they interacted, and were from different worlds, but they kind of liked each other and they sparked off each other. They were very real to me. And then the science fictional element I thought fit into the story really, really well. I'm sorry, the fantasy element. And I think
this could totally happen, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely hard science fiction. And I think that, the one drawback I think to the story is that I think the Vietnam tragedy was introduced a little bit late, that it should have been hinted at earlier, but maybe it was and I missed it. But other than that, it's such a tiny, detail. Other than that, this was a really great story. It's really fun to read. It was super exciting. It was touching. It was heartfelt. And the payoff at the end was extremely satisfying. And the Twilight Zone episode was really well done as well. I didn't realize that he wrote them both together, but it makes a lot of sense because they just both work really well. They were both cast. Both characters were cast very well. I really liked Danny Kaye in that role. I don't know who the other actor, I don't know his name, but he did a fantastic job as well. And that's interesting though that they asked him to change the ending and then he did it. Do you know what the original ending was? I know you didn't have time to read it, but do you know what happened?
No, I couldn't find. I looked around. I couldn't find anyone who, said specifically what the original ending was. So I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I'd be very curious to find out. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, this is definitely one of the best stories in this batch. Ellison said it was one of the most important stories of his career. And I agree with you that I love the idea of the pocket watch with this extra hour on it. I think there's something really poignant about that idea that, that in your daily life, you just might waste an hour doing nothing, scrolling through your phone or like whatever. But then at the moment of your death, that if you could live an extra hour at that point, that like how much would that mean to you? And how tempting would that be at that, at that moment. So I really like that idea. And I really loved these two characters. I agree with you that they were both really well drawn. And I totally felt and believed the elderly man's love for his wife, and the part where we find out. So basically the Vietnam vet, what happened was that he was sort of pinned down and thought he was going to die. And then some other soldier sacrificed his life for him. And he's been haunted by survivor's guilt ever since, and has, rented an apartment near the cemetery where this fellow soldier is buried, so that he can visit the grave. And he's just kind of like, been destroyed by this guilt. And it's really, really moving. That part of the story where you get that kind of flashback or backstory. So all that I thought was really, really, really well done. I had some problems with the ending, I guess. Like the logic of it didn't 100% make sense to me. I mean, I think it's good, but I definitely had some quibbles about it. So like I thought the idea of having this extra time was really, like I said, really compelling. But then it turns out that when you use this extra time, you can also talk to the dead. And so really, it doesn't become so much about time so much as just communicating with the dead. And I thought that, they could have just had something that allows you to communicate with the dead, and the plot would have been the same. And so maybe that should have just been established a little sooner, because it felt a little like random to me when toward the end you find out, in this extra time, you can also talk to the dead. They come back and you can talk to them. And then there's this moment where the elderly man says, I'm going to entrust this pocket watch to you. And all I ask is that you give me 1 minute out of the hour that remains to communicate with my dead wife. And the Vietnam vet says, no, that would be wrong. And the elderly man says, okay, that was the last test. You passed the test. But now I'm going to give you a minute for you to talk to the person you want to talk to. And it just seems so weird. I was like, wait, what? I thought we just established that this would be wrong, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah,
Like, am I crazy? Like, it seems so.
No, I can see that, but I thought emotionally it worked for me because it did bother me because I was thinking, like when he first says, "All I ask is that I have 1 minute," and I was thinking, no, that's absolutely wrong. And then the way the Vietnam vet, it just like rips out. He doesn't even think about it. It just like rips out of him. He's like, no. He just like hears himself say it almost, and he's kind of surprised. He's like, oh, why would I not allow this? But he's like, but he realizes like he can't allow it. Of course, you can't just say, we're going to give 1/60th of, doomsday. We're going to give to some guy. Because if everybody along the chain of people who's owned the pocket watch, all the different paladins of the Lost Hour, because it's not like this paladin is like immortal. He's not. He's a guy who had it passed to him, who the person before him had it passed to him, and now he's passing it to someone else. So if everybody decided to take a minute, because they feel like they really deserve it and somebody's really important to them, then after 60 generations, the world would end. And you don't want that, so you can't do that. So I really understood it when the guy was like, no, I can't do it. And I was like, yeah, of course you can't do it. Like, even no matter how much you'd want to do it, you just can't. But then when he said, oh, now I'm going to give it to you, I thought, well, that's absolutely wrong. You can't do that. But then going forward from there, it was incredibly satisfying to me that he was able to talk to the soldier who gave up his life for him and say, he always wanted to tell him, I'm sorry, like, thank you for giving up your life to me. You didn't have to do that. You didn't know me. I don't know you. You gave your life to me. And then, but in retrospect, he finds out, no, that this soldier actually didn't even know he was there. And the soldier thanks the Vietnam vet and says, no, thank you for letting me not have to die in vain. That I thought, all this time I thought I died in vain, but now I know I didn't. I saved somebody's life through it. And it was really worthwhile life to save. So I thought that was super satisfying. And you're right. There was kind of like a disconnect there for a minute where I had to go, all right, I don't really like this, that he's giving him a minute. But then after you get past that point, the rest of it I thought was fantastic.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, it works really well emotionally. Like, intellectually, I had some niggling problems with it. Yeah. But I mean, I think it maybe could have been tweaked, but it's totally fine the way it is. I mean, and I do wonder, maybe, I don't know if the original ending had something to do with that. If, the original ending was he refuses to use the watch, and then they're like, no, they have to use the watch, and Ellison resisted that for a long time and ultimately decided to go in that direction. I don't know. That's just speculation, but yeah, I mean, definitely one of the better stories, like I said, in this batch. And again, just like great premise that I thought was just really memorable. It's actually interesting with the TV adaptation because Ellison, there's an essay you can find online. I guess I should have sent it to you, where Ellison talks about this, his writing process. And he said that he had a couple actors in mind for the elderly man, and he felt like Danny Kaye ruined the episode through his performance. I thought it was good, personally. I mean, I have less invested in it than Ellison did emotionally, but I really liked Danny Kaye, but yeah, just for the record, Ellison didn't. And you'll notice that the episode is directed by, what is the name? Is it Alan Smithy? There's this name that directors use in Hollywood if they want to disavow their work. And so, yeah, so I guess the director, wasn't happy with how it turned out, and Ellison wasn't happy with, I think it was something like the studio. It was a big deal at the time to get Danny Kaye. He had retired, and they brought him out of retirement to be in this episode. And so the studio really wanted him, but, the director and the writer didn't. So, I think that's maybe where all that comes from, but I liked him personally.
I thought he was great, and I wouldn't necessarily trust Ellison as a casting director. There's an intro at the beginning of the audiobook, and I don't know if it's in the regular book as well, but there's an intro by Neil Gaiman where he talks about Ellison reading his own material and how he would put on all these fantastic accents, and it was really funny and entertaining. But then again, you listen to him and you're like, why is he choosing to make this character sound like Ethel Merman or something? It's really distracting, and it doesn't fit the story. But that's Ellison. He just kind of would do it. He would do the voices because he knew how to do the voices, and he wanted people to hear the different impressions he could do. So he would just like throw them in there, and they wouldn't necessarily fit. So, and I got that heard that at the beginning, at the intro, at the beginning of the anthology, of the collection rather, and then listening to him read the stories, I 100% agree. There are times when he reads them amazingly well, and there are times when you're thinking, I don't think that's the way you should read that. And I understand you're the one who wrote this, but I feel like some of the stories are better when there's somebody else reading the story, somebody who has a different interpretation of it. And I feel like maybe him not liking Danny Kaye, I wouldn't necessarily say, well, then absolutely it shouldn't be Danny Kaye, because there were a lot of choices he made with his reading that I didn't agree with.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes me interested to listen to his performance of this story. But yeah,
by the way, have you ever seen the movie? What's the name of the movie about the Himalayas that he mentions, that Lost Horizon? Have you ever seen that?
I've never seen it, no.
So I'll try not to waste too much time on this, but I went down a rabbit hole because he talked about, in the story, he talks about Lost Horizon and about the idea of the was this in the story or was this from an introduction?
No, the two characters talk about, like, the elderly man says, did you ever see this movie Lost Horizon? And the other guy says, no. And he says, well, I'm like the monk who whatever in that story or in that movie.
Right. And I thought that was cool. And I couldn't help wondering if maybe he got the idea from the story by watching that movie and thinking that's really cool that there's this person who's going to pass on this magical item, the care of this magical item, to someone who he deems worthy. And so I went and watched that, and I watched the wrong version of it. There's a version of it from the 70s, which is a musical, which is horrible. It's not horrible, but if you could cut out all the music, it would be a semi-decent movie. But it's like a 3-hour movie, and the music, every time they start singing, you just can't help thinking of King Vortigern from Monty Python's Holy Grail. Stop singing. But the reason I mention it is because then there is the Frank Capra version, which he's the guy who wrote and directed It's a Wonderful Life. That's, hugely popular around Christmas time. And I happened to see a Dick Cavett appearance from Frank Capra where he says that he actually threw away the first 2 reels of that movie because they had a screening of the movie and everybody was like, this movie's terrible. And so the studio was going to like can the movie. And he said, no, let me do another screening. And he literally burned, because it was nitrile film and it goes up like an explosion. He burned the first 2 reels of his movie, which is, 60% of the movie is gone. And then he put the main title on the beginning of reel 3 and showed it as a movie, and everybody loved it. And so the movie Lost Horizon starts in the middle. The reason I mention this is not to get off on a diatribe about Frank Capra and Lost Horizon, but to say that I think sometimes an author or an auteur like Ellison, who's clearly a genius, loses empathy for his audience because he's playing so hard in his genius. And not in this story, but in another story we'll talk about in a minute. Sometimes he gets so wrapped up in his own genius and what he can do that, as Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park, he didn't stop and think about whether he should. And sometimes I think maybe if somebody had come up to him and said, you need to burn 60% of this story, then you would wind up with a more enjoyable story. But you
didn't actually watch the Capra Lost Horizon. You just saw an interview with him, or did you actually watch the actual movie?
I watched the first half of it, but it was a version on YouTube that had this bizarre, like, superimposed 747 over the middle of it, and was like this trapezoid. Like they had foreshortened the screen, so it was really weird. So I watched half of it, and it was exactly the same plot and script as the 70s movie, except without the music. So I didn't feel like I needed to keep watching it. I was like, yeah, this is the same movie. I get it.
Okay. All right. But yeah, so Paladin of the Lost Hour is super cool. Anything else? Any final thoughts about that before we move on to the next story?
No, I just love the story. I think that this volume this story makes the collection worth the price of admission.
All right, cool. All right, so next story is called "The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World." And so in this story is a little hard to summarize, but so we start out and there's this human being who commits all these horrible crimes, and as he's being sentenced to death, he starts shouting about how he loves the whole world. Well, he loves everybody. And then we jump ahead like thousands of years, I think, to some human explorers in the far future discovering a giant statue of this murderer on an alien planet. And then we jump somewhere in time and space to this super advanced alien civilization where there are these two aliens who have this debate about whether they've captured this like evil, like seven-headed dragon dog monster kind of thing somehow. And they have some sort of process to like suck the evil out of it and transmit it out throughout time and space. And they have a debate about the ethics of doing that. I think it's fairly clear that them transmitting this evil out throughout time and space manifests itself in one instance as this murderer, that he would have been a nice, loving person otherwise, but because of the malign influence of this alien experiment, he becomes this horrible person. What do you think about that? What do you think, Tom, about that? First of all, that plot summary, does that sound right? Anything you want to add to that?
No, I'd say that sounds right.
Okay, so what did you think of the story?
So I was reminded of, remember when we were at Clarion and we made a t-shirt with all the funniest kind of slams that we had for other people's fiction on the back of the t-shirt? There was like 10 of them.
Yeah, I remember like half of them were mine. That sticks out in my mind.
That doesn't surprise me because you have a good way of slamming a story in a funny way. But there was one, and this story made me think of it. There's a fire in your mind, but all I can see is the smoke coming out of your ears.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
And I think that was from John. I can't think of his last name. I could picture him, but I can't think of his last name. It was a guy named John.
Sullivan?
Sullivan, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, John
Sullivan.
Sullivan.
I'm not 100% sure. But sorry.
The guy with the kind of Elton John glasses.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was John Sullivan, maybe. But anyway, that's what this story made me think of. That and I don't like it when there's a story that I consider myself fairly intelligent, but I don't like stories where I feel like if I were smarter, I would enjoy the story more. And I feel like that's the case with this. Like there's some genius here, but the writer is like, well, if you're not smart enough to follow me through my genius, then you're just going to have to not enjoy it. And that's kind of how I felt about this story. I felt like it was obviously brilliant and it just wasn't really enjoyable. It was just kind of like you said, the plot is so hard to follow and there's clearly stuff going on, but it's all kind of subtext and you have to read between the lines everywhere. And if you're the kind of person who loves that kind of thing, there are people who love it. I used to love that kind of thing when I was younger. I don't, for whatever reason, have patience for it anymore. But I used to love like, oh, I think what he's trying to say here is, this. I used to love that kind of feeling of like mystery, trying to figure out what was happening. And I just don't dig it anymore. So I didn't really like this story very much.
Yeah, I definitely found this frustrating on a first read, that it was just more obscure than it sort of pointlessly obscure. Just the basic plot. And I think that on a second read, I liked it a lot more. I think it's a really cool, like everything I just described, I think is a really cool idea. I think this idea of this alien civilization, that evil is this sort of palpable physical presence, sort of reminds me of the Fifth Element, but that you could suck it out of somebody and put it somewhere else. And it kind of brings up all these interesting it's a sort of an interesting ethical dilemma, like to what degree are you justified in keeping your country or your family or whatever safe by passing costs on to other communities, all that stuff I think is really interesting. But yeah, I definitely think it could have, and this is sort of a new wave, kind of, this story was from 1969, sort of a new wave thing to try to be very artsy and literary and oblique. Ellison said that he wanted the structure of the story to be like the spokes of a wheel where, rather than a line where things sort of connect ultimately, which is true. Did you want to say something, Tom?
No, that's really interesting.
So like I said, I mean, when I reread it, I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I mean, and the ideas are really cool, but I definitely think it could have been clearer on a first read. And I also felt like the characters, I mean, sort of this, what happens in the plot basically is that one of the characters tries to sabotage this process, and then it gets put on trial and executed by his super advanced alien civilization. And then he asks that a statue, that his life be commemorated by them building a statue to one of the victims, basically, which is how this statue of this murderer from Earth ends up being built. And so basically it's a story about this person, this alien sacrificing himself. But I felt like we didn't really get to know the aliens well enough for that sacrifice to land with as much emotional force as it could have. So like these two characters, Lena and Semph, I think we could have spent a little more time. Like, are they friends? Are they lovers? Like, how long have they known each other? Like, I just think those characters needed to be fleshed out a little bit more for the sacrifice at the end to really land. One interesting thing about this story is that I'm not really familiar with this, but there's a very popular anime series called Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it was apparently inspired by this story, and one of the episodes is called like The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World. So It's very overt, a very overt nod to this story.
Did that happen while Ellison was alive, and did he know about it?
Well, I assume not, because he would have sued them, right?
Right, that's what I was thinking.
I don't know. I mean, I think it came out in the 80s or something. I mean, I think it's, so it would have been definitely while he was alive. I don't know. That actually never occurred to me. Like, why did he not sue them? But I wonder if
they paid him. Maybe they paid him.
Yeah, or maybe he just didn't, watch anime and never heard about it. Or I don't know. It's funny. That's funny you bring that up. I don't know.
That's a missed lawsuit right there for sure. Well, but you make me think that that's part of the problem with listening to an audiobook instead of reading is when you're
God,
reading,
I can't even imagine trying to understand this on audio. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the when you're exactly. That made it harder. If you're reading and you come up across something that you're like, I don't get that, you naturally just go back a few paragraphs and start again until you get it, and then you keep going. Whereas an audiobook, it's just like a freight train. You're going along for the ride, and you're not. I mean, you can rewind, but then however many times you rewind, there's still a steamroller going on. You don't have time to pause and like consider and reread a sentence 2 or 3 times, and then read the next paragraph twice, or it doesn't work that way. So you're making me think I should probably not default to audiobooks like this, despite the fact that I don't have a lot of time in my life right now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely I would read this story in print rather than listening to the audio. I thought it, like, I ended up thinking it was kind of cool. But it is definitely a story you have to read. Just know going in, it's a story you really have to read twice to really get a solid handle on what's going on. So if you're not interested in reading it twice, maybe give it a pass. Okay, any final thoughts on that, or should we move on?
No, let's move on.
Okay, next story is called I'm Looking for Kadak, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. So Ellison wrote this story for an anthology called Wandering Stars, edited by Jack Dan, which was an anthology of Jewish science fiction stories. And so this story, it's set on an alien planet where at some point in the past, I guess, like humans, like Jewish humans had come to this planet, and the native alien population had like converted to Judaism or something. And so you have this group of aliens who are all super Jewish and talk like kind of like stereotypical Jewish, like Brooklyn Jews who use a lot of Yiddish and stuff like that. So Tom, what'd you think of this story?
I thought that, well, what do you think? What do you think I thought of this story?
You liked it? You thought it was funny?
Yeah, okay. I was just checking to see if you
How well I know you.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought this was possibly the best 3,000 word story, funny story I've read in a long time, except the problem is that it's 9,000 words.
Yeah, exactly. Man, you just took the words right out of my mouth again. Okay.
So I thought the premise is absolutely hilarious. I was laughing out loud when I figured out, when I understood what was happening, that this was actually an alien talking. Because at first you're getting the Yiddish, and I was going, okay, yeah, this is fun. And then when I realized it's like this blue alien with like multiple, like several arms, and like I just busted out laughing. And I pictured Mike Resnick, my mentor, sort of also kind of a mentor to you two, our clarion teacher. I pictured him absolutely loving this story. I remember him telling, he had a story about where they talked about like one of the lost tribe of Israel winding up somehow in the American West. And didn't he have I could be completely misremembering this, but I think he had a story.
I don't remember if it was the American West or if it was like Africa or something, but he definitely had a story where there's these people who you wouldn't think of as being Jewish talking like this character in this story does. And he might have even written it for the same anthology. I don't know, but
well, I thought there's probably were multiple stories he wrote, because the Africa one sounds like it would totally. I mean, he loved Africa, right? And he traveled there a bunch, and his nickname was Bwana. And but he also, there was one, and I'm pretty sure this was him, where Tonto, the Lone Ranger, was Yiddish, and he was from like the Lost Tribe, and it was like just a slapstick funny story, but and I can't remember if like it ends up like Kimosabi means asshole in Yiddish or something like that, or if that comes from a different story. But I swear he wrote a story like that.
No, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, no, I remember this now. Yeah.
So I don't know. So I picture him loving this story, and I also picture him saying, as an editor, I can't buy it unless you cut the middle out of it. And this is where I'm talking about. When it really struck me when Frank Capra said he burned the first two reels of his his magnum opus, and then put out the third reel as a movie that everybody loved. I was thinking, if you cut out the middle 60% of this story, nobody would notice and everybody would love it. And I still love the story. I mean, it's funny all the way through. It's hilarious. The whole thing is so funny, and the whole concept is funny. It's done really well. The Yiddish in it is just absolutely delightful. The guy who read it in the audiobook, it was not Harlan Ellison. They hired an actor to do this one, or an audiobook reader, but this guy had a superb command of how you pronounce all this Yiddish, and it made it so funny. But at some point, I had this picture in my head of Steve Rogers from Captain America at the beginning of the titular movie, when he's getting beat up and he tells the guy, I can do this all day. and then that becomes a running joke in the movies. But I just picture Harlan Ellison just being like, I can do this all day. And I picture me in the room with him saying, no, I get it. I know you can do this all day, but I don't think you should. I think you should, he had a plot, right? He had a place he was going with the story. The story winds up somewhere, but it starts out somewhere.
Let's just say what the plot is basically that this, alien planet is slated to be destroyed to make way for a hyperspace bypass or something like that, like Douglas Adams style. And so everybody has left. But this population of Jewish aliens, for some reason, there's some like Jewish ritual they want to perform before they leave, or they can't leave unless they've performed this ritual.
Sitting Shiva. And
they need 10 like Jews to perform this ritual, and they only have 9. So they have to go searching for this alien, this one of them who nobody liked, who left the community a while back, and turns out to be some like sort of religious seeker who has like migrated from religious community to religious community, like annoying everyone and getting kicked out everywhere he goes. Okay, yeah. Sorry. So sorry, Tom, continue.
Yeah. So yeah, it goes somewhere, right? At the end, you finally figure out because of his alienness, they're able to solve the problem of who's going to sit Shiva for this dead alien. And it's funny, like it's satisfying, but it doesn't need to go on. The middle, 6,000 words is just not really necessary. And if I may, it winds up being kind of fakakta.
Well, no, because I started this and I saw what the basic premise was, that it's this basically one joke story about, isn't it funny to have an alien who speaks Yiddish? And I was like, and I saw that the story was like 25 pages long or something like that. And I was like, there's no way that this is not going to wear out. It's this one joke is not going to wear out its welcome, But then after like 10 pages, I was like, wow, it still hasn't worn out its welcome. I'm still laughing, But then we got to like 15, 20 pages and I was like, okay, it is definitely worn out its welcome now. Like I'm ready for this story to be over. So yeah, I totally agree with you that this should have been 1/3 its length. And I just think, especially getting into the second half of this book, you start to see Harlan Ellison's Achilles heel of just being really impressed with himself start to cause more and more problems for my enjoyment of some of these stories. Because, yeah, I definitely agree with you that the story is not, not as, funny as he thinks it is. It's pretty funny, but like it's not 9,000 words long funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think we're in total agreement about this.
I wonder if the anthology was, if he had a kind of like a word count assignment, like if they told him like it's got to be 9,000 words and so, or 25 pages or whatever it is, and so he went, well, I gotta fill the form here.
I don't know. I've never heard of an anthology telling an author it has to be that long, so I don't know if that would have, I sort of imagined that he just had a list of Yiddish words and he's like, I'm going to write a story where I use every single one of these or something like that,
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
But so, yeah, if the idea of an alien who speaks Yiddish, is up your alley, maybe you would, want to check out this story. But yeah, I think for most people, it's going to try your patience before you get to the end.
Yeah.
But there's no question that Harlan Ellison knows a lot of Yiddish and the ending of the story is pretty clever, I thought.
That to my mind, you just hit something that I love and hate about him. And I think he just has this absolutely encyclopedic command of the English language, where he almost like Oxford English Dictionary-ic command of the English language. He just knows every mot juste, every right word for everything, and he can describe everything in detail, and he never will let anything be used furniture. Instead of saying man-eating tiger, he's going to say a man-eating Sumatran black panther. he's always going to have like a twist. He's never going to let anything be used furniture. Nothing is taken as rote. He's going to twist everything on its head all the time. And it's fascinating to watch him do it. It's like watching a skilled gymnast going through a routine. But at the same time, it's like after a while, you're thinking, okay, but my butt's starting to hurt. Can you get to the point here? Or can you move it along a little bit, get the story going? After a while, he wears you out.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next story. This one is called How Interesting a Tiny Man. This story is noteworthy for being published in 2010, which is 15 years later than the second newest story in this book. So Ellison was, I think sort of semi-retired or sort of on the outs in publishing, and was maybe just publishing like chapbooks and stuff like that. But he published this story in Realms of Fantasy. I remember when it came out. I remember when it came out. I was really excited. I subscribed to Realms of Fantasy at the time, and I was really excited to see a new Harlan Ellison story. And at that time, I thought I was like, this is just okay. It's nothing special. But I actually liked it more rereading it for this. But so the premise is that there's a first-person narrator who describes creating a tiny man who's, like a 6-inch tall man or something. And the the wider society just has nothing but this irrational hatred for this little man he's created, and he kind of and the narrator, I should say, goes on the run with the tiny man, but they eventually get captured. And then there's sort of two endings to the story, and one in which the first person narrator is revealed to be female, and the other ending in which the tiny man somehow is revealed to be God or have godlike powers or something. So Tom, what'd you think of the story?
I didn't write any notes on this one for some reason, and it has faded quite a bit in my memory since I read it. But what I remember thinking as I was reading it was, I thought at first that it was kind of a critique on science, on the state of science fiction and fantasy at the time. That I could hear Tim Powers' voice through the whole thing from our Clarion experience. Almost like he was saying, oh, this is just a story where it's like, oh, look, how interesting, a tiny man. That there was sort of, Ellison was kind of poking fun at people who write stories where it's just like, hey, here's a fantasy element, but it doesn't mean anything. And then when I got near the end, I was like, well, clearly he wants to have it mean something. But he didn't really 100% know what. I mean, he made it resonate in terms of, everybody hates this scientist for doing this thing, and he made sure he made it resonate somehow. But then you get to the end, and there's a couple of different ways it resonates, and I feel like it's almost like he wrote it to show people how to write fantasy and science fiction. Like, don't just have it be how interesting a tiny man, have it resonate and have some kind of payoff at the end. And here's two examples of how you could do that. But it didn't really stick with me that well. I thought it was cool. Again, I thought it was fun listening to it all the way through. I think his writing is just fascinating. But overall, I like I said, it's kind of faded for me.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, when I first read it, I thought it was just okay. And reading it now, it's like, oh, this is actually, I enjoyed this more than I remembered. I mean, I still wouldn't say it's, like you have to go out and read it or anything, but I think it does resonate more. In 2010, I feel like we hadn't quite gotten to the whole, ordinary people's irrational hatred is just omnipresent yet. Like I still thought of ordinary people as being kind of ordinary rather than like crazy and malicious or, full of hate.
Oh, yeah.
And so the way that this tiny man is hated by everybody for no reason kind of hits me a little bit more now than it did then, just with social media and everything that's happened since. And yeah, like there's a lot of ways you could interpret this story. I mean, a couple, and I don't know, I don't have any like inside dirt on what Ellison intended with this story or anything, but just what strikes me, I mean, Ellison himself was a short person, and I wonder if that, the fact that it's this tiny man that everybody hates, if there's something going on with that. He also wrote short stories in a world where people really only value novels, and I wonder if there's something going on with that, with people not appreciating the tiny man who's perfectly fine the way he is, being tiny. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that this doesn't seem to be just, an interesting, a story that Harlan Ellison thought was like an interesting idea, and he thought of a plot to go with it. I mean, it definitely feels like personal, or that he's trying to communicate some grievance or something with the story. But
yeah,
I don't know.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't think that. It makes a lot of sense that it would be sort of autobiographical, that he's nearing, like you said, he's been kicked out of the inner circle of science fiction and fantasy, and now he's publishing his own stuff, kind of self-publishing his own limited edition books, and it kind of like a Piers Anthony figure. He's ostracized and everybody hates him, and now he's kind of commenting on that through this story. Like, look, yes, here I am. I'm a tiny man. I write tiny stories, and everybody hates me. And I didn't think of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's... It does feel like a story that, you could say what he meant by it, but I don't know. It would be interesting. I don't know if he ever said, what he meant by it, but I feel like somebody probably knows out there. I guess one thing I forgot to mention with The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, it's maybe germane here, is that was another one where I sort of felt Ellison was maybe... that it was, commenting on something that he felt, in the same way that I get that same feeling about How Interesting a Tiny Man. Because Ellison, he had this uncontrollable rage that got him into trouble over and over and over again, and I just get the strong sense that he just thought of himself as this hero, heroic, loving person who was just misunderstood and mistreated by everyone. And he was also, when I interviewed Nat Segaloff, who wrote a biography of Ellison, he said that Ellison was diagnosed with bipolar disorder toward the end of his life. And so with The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, I wonder if there's something going on there. I mean, I don't like to psychoanalyze authors too much, but I think it is worth considering whether Ellison's, putting together this story in which evil is this uncontrollable force that comes from outside you and makes you do things you don't want to do, if that was expressing some way that he felt about how he existed in the world, that he was basically this loving person, and that there was this beast that came out and almost felt like it was this alien, alien force messing with him.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to separate his deep beliefs from his fiction. I think they would have to seep in. Like, Tolkien always said that The Lord of the Rings had nothing to do with World War II, but then you have to kind of say, well, not overtly, I'm sure, but how could it not? That was the biggest thing going on at the time, and how could it not seep in? Just the same way, how could Ellison's his inner struggles not come out in his fiction somehow?
Yeah. I guess one other thing I'll just mention is that this story reminds me a lot of a story that I read, I think roughly around the same time. There's a story called The End of the Line by Amy Bender, which is also, it's about a guy who goes to a pawn shop or something and buys a tiny man. And the stories are very, the plots are different, but the setup is very similar. And I really love that story. So I think it's an interesting, if you're able to get your hands on it, it's just an interesting exercise in comparing and contrasting how two very different authors explore the same basic premise.
Well, I can't let this go by without telling my own tiny man story, because it just hit me that I have one. That I was, when my oldest Maddox was a year and a half old and could barely talk, I used to walk around these woods trails with him in a stroller, in like a jumped up stroller that has like fat tires and stuff. And he would have to get out sometimes to go to the bathroom. So I had him out, and he said, "Big man coming." And I looked at him, I said, "What?" And he said, "Big man coming." And I started looking around, and there was a 6-foot+ man walking down the trail toward us. And I think it was kind of creeping him out. So he was telling me there's a big man coming. And I said, "No," I said, "that's nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. That's just I know that guy. He's okay." And he said, "Oh, okay." And then from then on, anytime we'd be on the trails and he'd get out to go to the bathroom, he'd say, "Big man coming," whether or not the guy was there. And so this one time I said, no, there's nobody there. Nobody's coming. There's no big man coming. And he said, "Oh," and then he went, "Tiny man coming." Sorry, Dave. You can cut that out if you like.
No. This is cute. Now that I have kids, I have to be I can't complain about other people talking about their kids, because I have to be able to. I have to have that same privilege to just bore people talking about my kids. So.
Right.
Okay, so shall we move on to next story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next story is called Djinn, like a genie, Djinn. Djinn, no chaser. The premise of this story is that there's a newly married couple, and the wife is determined to decorate their apartment. And so they go to this, they're looking for, is it like Turkish revival or something? Some sort of particular style of furniture.
Turkish period, she calls it.
Turkish period. And, ends up in this obviously magical shop where they get a lamp. And then when they get back to their apartment, they rub it, and a genie starts talking from the lamp, but it's trapped in the lamp, and it's really pissed off and starts tormenting them with all sorts of magical phenomena. And then this drives the husband crazy, and he checks himself into a mental hospital. But then at the end, it turns out that the wife has placated the genie by freeing him from the lamp with the aid of a can opener. So Tom, what do you think of Djinn No Chaser?
All right, what do you think I thought of it?
I don't think you liked it.
Really? Okay.
You did like it? Oh, okay. I mean, I could see it's the kind of story that you would like, but okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I have to flash back for a second to the looking for Kadak story. All the way through that story, I kept thinking, did I write this? Because it's the kind of stuff that I love, but at the same time, it was like looking in a mirror, in a funhouse mirror, where people have always told me my whole life, look, your stuff is funny, but it doesn't go anywhere. And this one I thought was funny, but goes somewhere. And I don't necessarily like the ending is obviously not satisfying. And I picture you absolutely hating the ending, and I hated it as well. But I thought the story itself, the premise, and the two characters, the husband and wife, were such a fun, unique couple together that I really liked them. The way they call each other squires, and the humor in it was so perfect, so funny. There's one moment jumps out where he's laying in bed and she says, "Are you asleep?" And he says, "Yes." And she goes, "Well, why did you answer me that?" And he says, "I was raised polite." And I thought there were so many funny moments like that all the way through it. And I love that, again, nothing is taken as rote, nothing is used furniture to him. He writes, they're going to find a genie in a curio shop. And that's obviously a really trite idea, right? This like traveling curio shop that like pops into existence for a little while and then vanishes again. Having read volumes and volumes of 1960s and 1970s science fiction and fantasy, I can tell you that idea of some kind of traveling shop is not new, and probably was never new. It was not new back then. But the cool thing about it to me is he understands that when he writes it, and he says like, "Oh, a traveling curio shop with Aladdin's lamp in it. What a trite idea." He doesn't say those words. I can't remember what he says, but he kind of calls that out as being this trite idea, and he makes fun of himself about it. But the cool thing that I think is a product of the way he never rewrote anything is that instead of tearing it up and saying, "I'm going to start again," he just acknowledges it, makes it part of the story that it's trite and irritating, and talks about that for a minute, and then moves on and does something more, like pushes it forward. And I love that he does that. And I think a lesser writer would have torn this story up and started over or deleted it. And maybe a greater writer would have done the same thing, but not Ellison. He hits the sweet spot of improvisation where he's thinking, no, I'm going to say yes and to this. I'm going to go forward with it. And he does. And the whole thing is super funny. And the ending is absolutely not satisfying. The can opener is just like this wah, wah, wah moment. So that's the plus and minus of it.
Well, I started out liking this, and I actually, when I saw that the premise is there's this everyman character, and then he just encounters this genie, or I guess initially when it's the shopkeeper, the sort of magical shopkeeper who's going to introduce some element of magic into his life. I actually have a note in the margins where I wrote Tom's story, because this is like a Tom Gerencer like setup kind of thing.
Yeah, very much.
So I was initially, on board with the story. I think I think, yeah, I just thought it got like too goofy. For me, it overstayed its welcome, and definitely it ends up being just this Shaggy Dog story where you've read through 20 pages or something, and then it's just this dumb joke at the end. And so yeah, I wasn't crazy about this. It's also possible that my perception of it has been colored by the Tales from the Dark Side adaptation. I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch that?
I did, and in stark contrast to the Twilight Zone episode of the Paladin of the Lost Hour, that was awful. I mean, well, I have to say the actor who played the male main character, I thought he was fantastic. I thought he was cast just right. I thought
he was giving it his all. He was not phoning it in. He was
he nailed it. I thought the female lead was pretty good. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was miscast, and I think he was miscast in anything that he ever was in. I think he's obviously a fantastic basketball player, but I don't know if you remember his bit part from The Stand, but he did not make that work either.
Yeah, I remember him from Airplane, where it's okay for what it is because it's a gag, but it's a terrible. He's just not a good actor as far as I can tell.
Right. So that kind of wrecked it. But also I felt it was funny because I loved the story so much, except for the very end. I was like, come on, Shaggy Dog, and like baloney ending. He could have thought something better than that up. But then again, when I was happy all the way through it, and I was laughing all the way through it, and I loved the story. I still love the story, even despite the ending. Then when I watched that Tales from the Crypt episode,
Tales from the Dark Side.
Oh, sorry, Tales from the Dark Side episode. Halfway through, it had outstayed its welcome, to use your phrase. I was just like, okay, I'm over this. I don't know why I love the story so much. Can't stand this episode.
It's so it's like, I don't understand how an actual TV production feels that amateurish. Like it feels like high school kids messing around with the camera or something. It's just horrible. Well, no, I'm glad you liked the story. I mean, I didn't like it definitely as much as you did, but people can have different tastes, and that's all good.
Well, I pictured you. I pictured you not liking it because of the sort of lack of plot.
The main, I guess the main character doesn't do anything. That was also an issue with on the downhill side. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but some of these Ellison has a real problem with just main characters who just don't do anything for the whole story, and it's not that compelling.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, so whatever you do, don't watch the Tales from the Dark Side adaptation. But if you're into funny fantasy, maybe check out Djinn No Chaser. But
one last thought about it. I thought it was almost like a lost Sheckley story. It was very, very Robert Sheckley, except that I feel like Robert Sheckley would have had an ending. I remember telling him one time that I could tell that he wrote from the seat of his pants, and he gave me a lecture about that. He was like, absolutely not. He was like, science fiction has a long history in plotting. Plot is supremely important. I would never pants anything. And he just like went off on me, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm properly chastised. But I do think the aesthetic of it is very much a Sheckley story, but except that Sheckley would have put an ending on it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's two ways you could go with this. You could either have a better ending and a better plot, or if you want to keep the can opener to open up the genie's lamp, you could make it a short. Like in a little bit, we're going to get to from A to Z in the chocolate alphabet. Yeah. And like, to me, this reads like one of those, like this would be totally fine. The can opener opening up the magic lamp would be fine if it was like 3/4 of a page long. It's not okay. It's not okay for 20 pages or whatever this is. Right. All right, but let's move on to our next story. It's called How's the Nightlife on Cissalda? So the premise here is that they've sent a human like through a time space wormhole or something to explore another dimension, and he comes back with a non-human, like it's some sort of like sphere, right? Some furry sphere or something alien that he's copulating with, and And so in this other dimension, there's these aliens, and they're just sexually irresistible to all forms of life in the universe. And once you start having sex with them, you just never want to stop, and you can keep going because they secrete some sort of hormones or something that allow you to just keep having sex with them nonstop. I think until you starve to death or something. I'm not even sure if you even starve to death. I forget. And so they manage to detach the alien from the guy, and they kind of put him in a holding cell. But then because these sex aliens they're all telepathic or something. And so since they now know about Earth, they all just start teleporting to Earth and having sex with every person and animal and living thing on Earth. And so the guy gets out of the cell, the original explorer, and now he's the only person on Earth who's not having sex with one of these aliens. And so he kind of writes a story. He writes a note in a bottle about what's happened and throws it into the ocean. I forget if there's a tag on the end. Oh, and there's something about like the cockroaches someday are gonna evolve and they'll take over the Earth or something. But so Tom, what'd you think of how's the nightlife on Cissalda?
This is just an absolutely hilarious premise that the human race would just get humped to death. And I would, if Ellison were here, he'd be like, why are you saying humped? And it's because I just don't want to be on air saying the F word. But I just think it's an absolutely hilarious premise. I'm really fascinated by how he can tell a story without necessarily focusing on a character. He can just kind of range all over the world and tell you like what's going on and keep telling you all these different situations that pile up into this story. And he does have characters in it, right? But he spends more time kind of in introspection than he does in dialogue or action or anything like that in this story. I don't know. I just think it's a hilarious premise. I looked it up to see if it originally published in Playboy because I thought that would be right up their alley, but it didn't. It was in an anthology called Chrysalis, I think. But I don't know. It's just a really funny premise. It's fun to read. It's kind of disgusting too. It's kind of because he doesn't pull any punches on the graphic details of things. I mean, he does sort of, but he doesn't get as detailed as he could, I suppose. But it's a funny story. I mean, it's very funny. I guess I'll just leave it at that. It's not necessarily my favorite, but I just think it's a hilarious idea. That's how we're going to go out. So
yeah, I really liked this. I thought this was really funny. I don't know that I have a lot more to say about it other than that. I thought the ending was a little weak. The last line I thought was weak. It's something about like that he was the best fuck for a short time. He'd been the best fuck in the universe or something. I thought that could have been stronger. But overall, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was really funny. I've never read a story with this premise before. So yeah, I don't know, Tom, do you have anything more to say about this story?
Yeah, about the ending, I remember thinking that that I was glad that he didn't try to have some solution like he did with Djinn No Chaser with the can opener. I thought I didn't obviously want to like cheer on the human race ending, but I thought it was satisfying that's the end of it. Like, yes, that's how we go out. This is it right here. Thought that was satisfying. I thought if he had tried to think up some like way out for the main character and that was like goofy or it just would have been irritating. But then again, I thought, well, it could still be a good story if he were the kind of person who went back and rewrote things. And if he really worked hard to come up with a way that there was a satisfying ending where the human race survived, that could still be a good story. But I was kind of glad knowing who he is that he didn't do that.
I liked the plot. I liked the idea that that it becomes this sort of post-apocalyptic, story at the end because everyone's having sex with all these aliens and and that's basically destroyed the world, I liked that. I didn't have a problem with that. I just thought the last line was like with Djinn No Chaser. The last line was just a little bit of a wah 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 kind of thing. When I actually thought the story was good enough that it could have ended on a note of, like poignancy or something, you know, because there was like just something poignant at the end that he's the last survivor.
And that not only is he the last survivor, but he's the only one not having sex on the planet now, because his Cissaldan, or they pronounced it Cissalda Ellison read this one in the collection, and he pronounced it Cissalda.
Oh, okay.
So, and he read it in front of a crowd, and there was laughter all the way through it, which was really cool to hear. But he, so what was my point? This guy is, his Cissaldan has left him because I can't remember why, but he ends up
they detached the Cissaldan.
Oh, that's right. And then it's heartbroken, and it won't go back to him now. It's like,
yeah, and since they're all telepathic, none of them will couple with him anymore.
None of them will touch him. So now he's the only person on planet Earth not having sex, while the planet, just the human race, ends around him. And it had this kind of Burgess Meredith from that Twilight Zone episode feel. When all he ever wanted was to read books, and then the world ends and he's in a library, but he breaks his glasses and he can't read books. It had that kind of feeling, like this guy just, like, now he's the only one not having sex at the end of the world. And that was very poignant. But yeah, I agree. There could have been some kind of better line to finish it off.
Yeah. But again, overall, I thought it was really funny. So I would definitely, if you're into science fiction humor, I recommend this one. I'll also just mention, it reminded me a lot of there's a really great story by Kiz Johnson called Spar, where it's about a woman and she's trapped in a spaceship with this like tentacle alien that's having sex with her. And, so if you're into, science fiction stories where people have sex with non-human aliens, these are two of the best examples I can think of.
That reminds me, there's a Sheckley story. I might be confusing two Sheckley stories, but I think it's called The Day the Aliens Came. But there's a Sheckley story where these aliens show up and they start having sex with people, but they don't have just one gender. They have like 75 genders. And to really have sex, you have to like lock in with like all these different genders, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And these people would be having these massive orgies with aliens, with like 75 different aliens all at once. I think that's The Day the Aliens Came, but it might be a different Sheckley story. So if you're into alien sex stories, there's another one for you.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't read it, I don't think, but I know Ellen Datlow had an anthology called Alien Sex. I think there might be a couple. So, if you're really into the topic, there's more material to explore. All right. So next story is called From A to Z in the Chocolate Alphabet. And so this is a story. It's a collection of fantasy vignettes, one for each letter of the alphabet. So like the first one is A for Atlantean, and it talks about Atlantis. So the backstory for this is that Harlan Ellison used to do this sort of performance art thing where he would solicit ideas, like story ideas from the crowd, and then he would sit in the window of a bookstore or at a convention or something, and people could sit and watch him write the story in real time, and then he would read the story when he was done. And this was just to show that there's nothing magic about being a writer or the writing process. You just you can just do it anywhere under any circumstances if you just have the willpower to do it. And so he started doing these for like as fundraisers for bookstores. And so there was a bookstore in Los Angeles called A Change of Hobbit, and he wrote this story over 2 days as a fundraiser for that. And yeah. So Tom, what do you think of From A to Z in the Chocolate Alphabet?
Well, as a story, I mean, it's not a story, so it doesn't. It just kind of goes on, but there's a definite.
The vignettes have nothing to do with each other at all,
right? But there's a definite sort of marking time through it because what letter you're on. But the individual vignettes are mostly brilliant. They're each one of them is like, oh, that's really kind of an interesting idea, or that's a cool idea. Some of them are kind of like, what? That's kind of bizarre. But most of them are brilliant, I thought. So I enjoyed it. I mean, I don't know as I would go back and read it again, but that's interesting that was part of his sort of performance art. stuff that he did. I don't really have a ton to say about it. We could discuss some of the individual vignettes if you want, but I'm interested to hear what you thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a teenager, he had one called From A to Z in the Sarsaparilla alphabet that I read in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And I was like, I don't really get this format. I don't know. It's okay, whatever. And that's kind of what I felt about reading this. I mean, I actually went back and wrote a little synopsis for each vignette that I sent you. And doing that made me like it more. I was like, oh, these actually are pretty clever. A lot of them. I mean, it's sort of a mixed bag, I guess. Like, a lot of them are sort of, I feel like they're the ideas that you write out, you jot on a piece of paper in the middle of the night, and then you go back and look at it in the morning, and you're like, this isn't really good enough to write a whole story about, Yeah. So for example, there's one where a vampire joins a free love commune and then dies of an STD. There's one where a guy melts down a bunch of quarters to make a silver bullet to protect himself from a werewolf, but then it doesn't work because there's not that much actual silver in quarters. So they're kind of like, it's like, yeah, this is never an idea. This is not an idea that's good enough to write a 5,000 word short story about. But for a half a page, it's like, it's amusing. I don't know. I mean, I think it is really impressive that he was able to write so many of these things in, like sitting in the window of a bookstore. That's impressive. Some of them are really good. I mean, well, I'm curious, Tom, what did you think were some of the best of these?
Man, reading through your synopsis, I don't remember a lot of them. I just remember thinking, oh, these are really clever. But I don't know. I don't know what I thought. I think that vampire one was really funny. But yeah, you go ahead and tell me what you thought were the best. The one that stuck with me the most is for the letter S. There's one called Sulfidian the Sorcerer, and it's the longest, I think, of these. And it's about a sorcerer who comes to a party and performs miracles. Grants wishes basically for everyone who asks. And then his wife comes and it's like, what are you doing wasting time doing this? And forces him to leave. And he's cowed and leaves with his wife. And I thought there was something, again, sort of poignant or memorable about that one that, no matter how, assured a person seems in one social context, you never know what their home life is like or how they relate to people in other social contexts. So that was the most memorable one to me. I thought some of the first couple, like the Atlantis one, I thought was pretty cool. Basically, the premise of that one is that Atlantis wasn't destroyed by sinking beneath the waves. It became this, I guess, like in a lot of sort of pseudoscience kind of things, it became this advanced civilization and a like bubble city thing. But then it was destroyed when people from the surface dump toxic waste or something. There's some sort of radioactivity that destroys the civilization. And again, I guess it's the poignancy. It's the sort of like, with these shorts, I guess the ones that work the best for me is where it's funny or, it's amusing anyway, but then there's also some element of poignancy to it. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could see why it was chocolate alphabet. I think there was I don't know if they still do this, but when I was a kid in the 70s, that was a thing for a while where people would buy someone a chocolate alphabet for Christmas or for Valentine's Day. You would get a box and every different letter was a different chocolate. And I think they would all be kind of this, it wouldn't be like different fillings. It would just be like, different letters all done in chocolate. And so I think that's where he was coming from with this, that I could make a chocolate alphabet out of fiction, just like little interesting things to write down. So I thought that was kind of neat, but I don't know. I don't know that I would read it again.
Yeah, I do wonder if there would be a way to do this where it would, add up to something greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think that would work. I was also reminded of Bob and Doug McKenzie's 12 Days of Christmas spoof where they're like Canadians from SCTV, and they're singing the 12 Days of Christmas. But if you listen to it over and over again, which I do around Christmas time, you realize that they only get to about day 8. They don't go all the way through 12. And at one point, I think they're on like day 5 or 6, and one of them says, hey, this should just be the 5 days of Christmas. It's too hard for us. And then you realize, well, if they had actually gone through the entire 12 days of Christmas, it would wear out its welcome. It wouldn't be funny anymore. It would be boring. So they truncated it. They made it really short. And I think that's kind of maybe what this kind of format suffers from, is you get to like letter L or something, and you're like, oh, I still got a bunch more of these to go through.
Yeah, but if they were all set in the same world and somehow, each one recontextualized the earlier ones, then the last one, recontextualized everything somehow. That would be pretty cool.
That would be very cool. I wonder if anybody's ever done that, where they've done an alphabet sort of series of vignettes that like this, but that had a plot running through them. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I don't even know of other just alphabet stories like this at all, let alone that did anything. So right. I don't know. If anyone knows of any, let me know. I mean, as far as I know,
if you're an editor, that might be a new anthology idea for you that probably wouldn't sell.
Yeah, if you're an anthology editor with a big stack of money that you're not that attached to, there's an idea for you.
No charge.
Okay, so let's go back to our list here. Our next story here is called Eidolons. Okay, so this one, it starts out and there's a narrator who tells us he's this very dangerous person, but he's also interested in miniatures, like you would use like army, like toy soldiers for war games. And so he comes to this town where there's a man who has the most amazing collection of painted miniatures ever. It's like soldiers from every army throughout history. And but they're all, when this narrator looks at them, they all have terrified expressions on their faces. And he gets from the owner that the owner is somehow able to capture the souls of soldiers at the moment throughout time at the moment of their death, and kind of trap their souls in these painted miniatures. So that's kind of the first section of the story. And then the owner of these miniatures says that how he was able to do this was through this magic scroll that he discovered. And he tells the narrator where it is. I forget, it's in some cave in the coast of something or other. And so then the narrator goes and gets these magic scrolls, and so then the story becomes kind of a like transcript of like half of them or something, and then at the end, the character says, the narrator says, I decided not to give you all of them because then you would be able to have all these superpowers. And then I was a little confused, but there's somehow, I think, the implication that the soldiers are out in the world somehow. I don't know. That's what I got from the story anyway. So Tom, what did you think of Eidolons?
Well, I thought this was a good illustration of your biggest criticism of Ellison, which is that he just, never fixes anything. He just writes it. And I feel like this was like, he was writing a story and got bored with it and decided to write a different story and kind of just went, no, they're the same story. And then because he was famous, he was able to sell it. That's kind of what I think. I mean, I was really fascinated by the idea of the miniatures. I don't know if that's an original idea, but the way he was doing it was really cool to me. These miniatures, these soldiers, like all frozen at the point of their death. And the way he described, again, his just encyclopedic knowledge, just describing all these different types of soldiers from all these different wars throughout history was fascinating. And the idea that somebody froze them was fascinating. And then I was like, I was just getting to the point where I was like, I can't wait to see what happens next. And then all of a sudden the story jumps the track and goes off in a completely different direction. And we start talking about those letters that I was like, no, I want to hear about the soldiers, and I want to hear about maybe 1 or 2 or 5 soldiers in particular that get together and something really cool happens. And, you just set up this awesome premise, and now you're taking me over here to this less awesome premise. And now you're going to spend 60% of the story over there instead. And I don't know. It just completely lost me, this one.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I read this and then I could not remember the contents of the scrolls at all. They didn't stick in my mind or make any sort of impression on me at all. So again, I went and I wrote a little synopsis for each one that I sent to Tom. But they're just not interesting to me. I mean, it reads like from A to Z in the chocolate alphabet, except just like way less interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not a big fan. Like you say, I loved the initial setup with the miniatures, and then it just totally lost me after that.
I feel like he just got bored with it. Like he just wasn't sure where to take it and wasn't interested in it anymore. But I wish he had found a way to get himself interested in it, or found something interesting about it that he could explore more, because it was such a cool idea. It's so well done at first.
Yeah, if there's anyone who likes the story, I would be curious to know why. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I'm just going to scroll down to my synopses of these scrolls. So I'll just read the first couple just to give, if you haven't read this story and you're just curious, like, what are we talking about? So number 1, a ghost attempts to communicate with the living by manipulating dust motes. 2, distant lovers are connected through the spirit world. 3, human foolishness is temporarily suspended. So it's stuff like that. It's sort of like they don't really have anything to do with each other. It seems like just kind of Ellison riffing on some of his preoccupations. There's this thing called Jam Karat. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's this Indonesian concept, apparently. I think he says the literal translation is like the hour that stretches or something. Yeah. But he's obsessed with it. It gets mentioned all the time in these different stories. I'm still not sure what the significance of that is really, but yeah, it's Tom. What do you think?
I thought the idea of human foolishness being temporarily suspended, that should be a story or a novel. That's a great idea. But then there's a few of them that are great ideas, but yeah, I don't know. This thing just kind of bounced off me.
I guess the last one is a boy is shocked by his reliably kind father refusing to help a homeless man.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
That was the best of these. I wondered if that was an autobiographical piece from Ellison. I mean, it definitely felt like it to me, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Eidolons, I don't know. Not a big fan.
Yeah.
Definitely don't recommend. Okay, so that brings us to the last story in this batch, last story in the book. It's called All the Lies That Are My Life. This is not science fiction. This is the only story in this book that doesn't have any sort of speculative element. It's a story about writers. And so it's basically about these 2 writers, science fiction writers, who have had a rivalry throughout their lives. And one has become, a super famous celebrity writer who lives this dissolute celebrity lifestyle and, has lots of money and has all sorts of crazy adventures that he writes about and stuff like that. And then the other one is just kind of a, maybe moderately successful or not that successful writer. And it's just about their relationship over the years. And that's kind of backstory. And then in the present of the story, the celebrity writer has died, and the other writer has come to his funeral for the reading of his will. So Tom, what'd you think of All the Lies That Are My Life?
I was interested to see that it was nominated for a Hugo, being that it doesn't have any speculative element in it whatsoever. But I thought it was, it was fun in terms of his character study. The characters were so real, probably because they were real. That was really interesting and entertaining. I thought it's a novella, so it goes on quite a long time, where he's talking about this kind of manipulative writer who wants to control things after he dies. I thought that was a really interesting theme and well explored. I don't know. I mean, it's not science fiction. It's not fantasy. So I wasn't super crazy about it, but the writing is fantastic and the characters are fantastic. I looked it up to see who is this writer supposed to be? And there was this guy on, I apologize if you're listening and this is you. There was this guy on Goodreads who said that he was at a science fiction convention when he was a kid, when he was 18 or 20 years old or something. And it was 3 days before Ellison wrote this story. And he asked Ellison if he was still friendly with this certain writer. And Ellison said, no, I don't talk to him anymore. And then 3 days later, the story came out, and the name of the real writer sounds very similar to the one in the story. So he said, so you draw your own conclusions. And I think you're being a little egotistical there. I think it's probably Ellison talking about himself. But I don't know. That's basically my whole thoughts on it. I don't really have a ton of other thoughts on this one. What about you? Did you like it?
I actually really liked this. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like stories about writers, and this was, I thought, a really good story about writers. I mean, really, my only criticism I have of it is that I thought it was too long. I mean, when the celebrity writer is sort of when they're reading the will, and he's clowning on his lawyer and stuff like that. They're playing a videotape for the reading of this will. Right. And the famous writer is clowning on his lawyer. I thought that overstayed its welcome. And yeah. But other than that, I thought the story was really interesting. I mean, this was actually published as its own book, this novella. And unfortunately, again, I didn't find this out until, yesterday or whatever. So I didn't have time to, and it's sort of like a rare collector's item at this point, the book. So I don't know if I would have been able to get it anyway, but apparently the book version includes essays by a whole bunch of writers.
Yeah, that would be cool to see. Yeah.
So there's this book includes essays by Robert Silverberg, Norman Spinrad, Vonta McIntyre, Robert Sheckley, Philip Jose Farmer, Thomas Dish, and Ed Bryant, just commenting on the story and about their experiences with Harlan Ellison and stuff. So I would be very interested in getting my hands on that. I'm kind of sad that we have to talk about it without knowing that context. But so apparently in that book, it has illustrations of the characters, and the celebrity writer is drawn to look like Harlan Ellison. The unsuccessful or moderately successful writer is drawn to look like Robert Silverberg, and there's another writer who's kind of like the ghost writer for the celebrity writer is drawn to look like Ed Bryant. So there's definitely a level at which this is inspired by those people. The Robert Silverberg essay in this book apparently is devoted to sort of contesting the idea that this character is based on him. Again, I haven't read it. That's just what people say.
Right.
I mean, definitely Ellison has drawn some episodes from his real life. I mean, the two that I can identify is the way that these two writers meet at a science fiction convention is a highly embellished version of how Harlan Ellison and Robert Silverberg met initially. And then the thing about the celebrity writer hating his sister and them having this big falling out at their mother's funeral is basically taken from Ellison's life. I mean, it's been a long time since I read The Essential Ellison, but I'm almost certain that he describes that, in an autobiographical essay in there somewhere. So yeah, it's definitely, although if you know Ellison and Silverberg, it's clear that Ellison has kind of mixed around different, it's not like one is clearly one and one is clearly the other. He's kind of mixed them together in different mixed and matched in different ways.
Interesting. It's interesting too to me that the story is dedicated to, in the anthology, the story is dedicated to Robert Sheckley.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, the dedication, it's in Spanish and it translates, as near as I can tell, to something like, to my good friend who's stuck by me through bad times and bad, something like that. So yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I have a ton more to say about the story. Again, I overall I really liked it. It was one of my favorite pieces in the book. I think probably to have a really intelligent, insightful discussion of it, we would need to know what some of that bonus material was. So if anyone has that or can fill us in, let us know. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, but yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about it. Tom, do you have anything else to add?
Just that, I saw that too. That it was a book, and that it had all essays from all these friends of his who are writers, and yeah, I would love to read that too. I think that would be fascinating.
Okay, so that's all our stories for this batch.
I will tell you that if you do get the audiobook, there are 2 additional stories in the audiobook that are not in the print collection, and they are The Prowler in the City at the Edge of the World and Shattered Like a Glass Goblin. And The Prowler in the City at the Edge of the World is from 1967, and Shattered Like a Glass Goblin is from 1975. And I have not listened to those yet, but it's kind of a nice bonus that you get with this book. And they're both read by Ellison.
Okay, cool. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to do at least one more Ellison panel, talking about this book. What's it called again? The Top of the Volcano, the award-winning stories of Harlan Ellison. I think we theoretically could do another one because there's a lot of actually well-known Ellison stories in the Essential Ellison that aren't included in either of these books. But we'll see how sick we are of Ellison after we do the third one. But again, I'm really looking forward to that one because it includes A Boy and His Dog and Croatoan, which again, at least in my memory, are 2 of my favorite Ellison stories. And I was actually kind of a little apprehensive going into this batch of stories because I didn't remember any of these stories, having read or liked them before. Oh, except I said How Interesting a Tiny Man, I remember thinking was all right. But so I was glad that I liked Paladin of the Lost Hour and All the Lies That Are My Life as much as I did. Oh, and How's the Nightlife on Cissalda. And again, I thought that The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, I didn't particularly enjoy reading it my first time through, but I think it has really cool ideas. And if you are willing to put a little work into it, is worth reading for the ideas. Some of these, as I've said, were a mixed bag for me. But I guess, I don't know, Tom, any final thoughts on this batch of stories?
Yeah, I will tell you my final thoughts, but I just want to start by saying you sent me a copy of Top of the Volcano, and it arrived in the mail yesterday, and I could not believe how large it is. It's a doorstop. So it's huge, and now there's no audiobook, so I won't be able to listen to the audiobook. I'm going to have to read them with my failing eyes, but
yeah.
but that's I can't. That's now I'm going to segue into what I thought of this collection.
Oh wait, actually, let me just say, like, that's a bit of a collector's item, so don't throw it don't give it to the library or something. Sell it once you're done with it. Hold on to it or sell it because some of these Harlan Ellison things are not cheap. I mean, so it's good that he's that this greatest hits came out, which is a normal, like, new affordable book. But a lot of his other stories are becoming quite difficult to get your hands on. So just be aware of that, and I hope that they. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I don't mind shipping it back to you, but but to segue from there into what I thought of this collection, it's if you have to read or listen to a lot of Harlan Ellison, it's never going to be time poorly spent. He's such a good writer. Even his bad stories are very well written. I mean, and when I say a bad story by him, I mean it kind of doesn't go anywhere, or it's not, intellectually, logically doesn't make sense or something like that. But they're always so well written. His writing is so poetic. There are cool techniques that I notice he uses. Like, if you're a writer and you're interested in, learning about how to write short stories, he is like a masterclass in it. Like this one thing he does that I noticed that I thought was really cool is when he has an emotional bomb drop on someone, on a character. That's always such a difficult moment to handle when you're writing, but he does it in this really cool way. And he doesn't always do it this way, but I noticed this one way that he tends to handle it sometimes is like the thing will happen, whatever it is that, that's horrifying. And then the character will react sort of physically. You'll get like, I don't know if it's a gasp or whatever it is, or a slump to the shoulders or something. And then they'll kind of turn away and look at their surroundings, their environment. And then you'll get some sensory description of where they are. So it's clear that they're like so rocked that they're taking in the world around them all of a sudden. And then, so it starts with the bomb dropping, and then the physical reaction, and then where the person is, some description of the scene, and then the emotional reaction, and then the person uses words sometimes to talk. Now, it's such a cool thing where, I know you see him doing that and you think, a lesser writer would have like the bomb drop and then there'd be a reaction. And he doesn't do that. He takes a beat and he pulls you away somewhere else and then comes back, and you get the word reaction last. So there's lots of little things like that in his writing where you're just like, wow, he just really knew what he was doing. And it's a pleasure to read even bad stories by him. So
yeah, and he's a fascinating figure to me, because he had this crazy life, but then also because he made a career basically in short fiction. I mean, he's one of, maybe the most prominent science fiction author I can think of to have, made a career in short fiction.
Right.
So that's really interesting to me. And I was going to say that, I do hope that more of his work gets reprinted, because, he has a lot of really good stories that are increasingly hard to find. So it would be nice if, I don't know if there'll be a Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits Volume 2 or something like that, but there certainly could be. And it's also just striking to me that, that there's like, this book is the award-winning stories of Harlan Ellison, and then there's another, there's that Top of the Volcano book from 10 or 15 years ago that's also the award-winning stories of Harlan Ellison, and they're largely not the same stories. There's also all sorts of stories I remember reading in the Essential Ellison that aren't in either of those two books. So he has a lot of stories that are, award-winning or memorable or, important to the history of the fields or whatever. So, that's definitely worth, noting.
Yeah, it seems like the few people who, well, I guess I was going to say Philip K. Dick is sort of a parallel because he had so many great short stories, but he had a lot of novels as well. But then Robert Sheckley, he had 400 plus short stories, but he also had lots of novels, like several novels he wrote. So it is interesting to see somebody who basically he never wrote a novel, did he, Ellison?
I guess this is somewhat debated what qualifies as a novel or not, but basically he never had a big science fiction novel. His reputation rests entirely on short stories.
Wow. I mean that's shocking enough in itself, but the fact that he didn't have to earn a living anywhere else, that he didn't have to have a day job, and he did that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think the Hollywood stuff helped a lot with that too. But yeah, Repent Harlequin and Repent Harlequin to the TikTok Man, and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Some of those stories I think got reprinted like hundreds of times. So I think a lot of his income came from just a handful of just constantly reprinted stories.
No wonder he sued anyone who stepped on that. Also, I don't know if we mentioned it last time.
He probably made a lot of money through lawsuits too. I don't know.
He probably did. He may have, or he may have just spent a lot of money on them. I also wonder, we didn't mention last time, but I think it's worth tossing out there that in my view and in a lot of people's view, he wrote the best Star Trek episode in history, the one, the City on the Edge of Forever. I think we might have mentioned it last time, but it's just, I think we did, right? It's just such a fantastic
I don't remember if we did or not, but definitely that's, one of his best known. It's a screenplay, not a short story, but it's definitely one of his best known works.
Right.
Although again, he thinks that they totally fucked it up. So, but
he does.
Yeah. We need to start wrapping this up. I don't want to get into that whole thing. But maybe we can talk. Look, if you don't know about his acrimonious feelings toward the producers, you can look that up. I mean, that's well covered online.
Okay.
I guess I have one more note. I guess I want to mention. There's a couple things that recur in multiple stories in this book. And so one is just the idea of your whole life being a lie. I mean, obviously there's the story called All the Lies That Are My Life, but just that idea of your whole life being a lie gets mentioned on the Downhill Side and in the story Pretty Maggie Money Eyes that we talked about last time. I guess I should have said in that story, All the Lies That Are My Life, the reason it's called that is that there's this incident in the past of these two writers where the famous writer, they're driving somewhere together, and the famous writer says, there's just one thing that I hope nobody ever finds out, and it would just destroy me. It would destroy my reputation. It would destroy everything if this got out, and you know what it is. And the other writer, he doesn't know. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, this celebrity writer is such a kind of literary exhibitionist. He's like, what is he not? What sort of shameful secret or whatever could there possibly be that he hasn't already, broadcast to anyone who will listen? And at the end, the celebrity writer wills his literary estate to his friend, because this will continue to control him forever, that now he'll never, if he ever remembers or realizes what it is, what this dark secret is, he'll never reveal it, because now his financial future is bound up with this celebrity writer. So all that stuff I thought was really, really interesting.
That was fascinating. All the character studies too of all the different people in his life, but you're right that he manages to manipulate people after he dies, and that guy ends up feeling kind of damned and pissed off at him. Like, I don't know how you did it, but you're controlling my life now that you're dead. You're not dead. You're like this zombie.
And there's the third writer character who's kind of his own literary identity and career has been subsumed, becoming a ghostwriter for this other guy and contributing to his legend and the legend of his prolificness. There was a lot of cool stuff going on in that story. But then the other thing is that there's this quote, "Hell hath no fury like the uninvolved," which shows up in both Eidolons, I think more than once, and How Interesting a Tiny Man. And that's clearly something, Harlan Ellison just has these little things that he clearly is really, really attached to and that he just deploys over and over again. And that's just the idea that, the people who really, it's none of their business, but they, they shouldn't care at all, but they just can't help involving themselves with extreme anger in other people's lives. And there's just something weird about that. All right, cool. So, any other final thoughts, Tom, or are we ready to wrap this up?
Well, my final thought would be that I highly recommend the audiobook. You get the introductions to a lot of the stories. You get Harlan Ellison reading most of the stories, and you get 2 bonus stories at the end. So it's well worth it. But nothing wrong with the print book either.
All right, cool. So let's wrap things up there. And again, we are planning to do at least a part 3 of this. I guess, let us know if do you like these Harlan Ellison things? Do you want more, less, whatever? I mean, we're going to do at least 3, so you're stuck with 3. But if you want 4 or 5 or whatever, let us know. But that'll so keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, we're going to wrap things up there. So again, we're talking about this book, Harlan Ellison's Greatest Hits, with my good friend Tom Gerencer. So Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. That was a lot of fun.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.